Hello, in this video I'll be talking about nutmeg. Specifically, I will be covering what nutmeg is, its history, my experience with making nutmeg, nutmeg's composition, properties and uses, nutmeg's effect on memory, and finally how safe it is to consume. So what is nutmeg? Well, nutmeg is a spice with psychoactive properties. Nutmeg is the seed inside of the fruit of the Myristica fragrans tree, and the red areole that surrounds the seed is known as mace. The Myristica fragrans tree is native to the Spice Islands of Indonesia and is also cultivated in other parts of Indonesia, China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Grenada, Kerala of India, South America, and Sri Lanka. Nutmeg is used in many culinary preparations to imbue a spicy, sweet, warm, sensual flavor that reminds me of how Coca-Cola tastes. The essential oil of nutmeg contains most of the nut's flavor, as well as most of the psychoactive compounds that act on the brain to change a person's mood and thinking pattern. Now let me tell you a bit about the history of the nutmeg spice. Although nutmeg can brighten up the flavor of a culinary dish, this spice has quite a dark history. Before the mid-19th century, a small group of islands known as the Spice Islands in Indonesia was the only source of nutmeg and mace. In medieval Europe, nutmeg was prized and a costly spice used for food flavoring, medicine, and as a preserving agent because of its antibacterial properties. Nutmeg was also believed to ward off the plague. In the beginning, Europeans were exposed to nutmeg as a spice through the Muslim traders, who were the only ones to know where to find it. The first Europeans to discover the source of nutmeg were the Portuguese. They found nutmeg on the Banda Islands in Indonesia in 1512. The Portuguese did not control the trade on these islands, but they remained as participants without having a foothold on the Banda Islands. Later on, the Dutch East India Company invaded the Banda Islands and killed off 94% of the native population in order to obtain a monopoly over nutmeg as a trades good, which should give you a glimpse of what colonialism really is like. The British had control of one of the Banda Islands known as Roon. In 1667, the British traded Roon to the Dutch in exchange for the island of Manhattan and its city New Amsterdam in North America, which is also known as New York. When the Dutch couldn't pay attention and govern the islands during the Napoleonic War, the British temporarily took control of the Banda Islands from the Dutch and transplanted the nutmeg trees to Sri Lanka, Penang, Bencoolen, and Singapore. From there, the nutmeg tree was further spread to further colonies, like Zanzibar and Grenada. You'll notice that Grenada now is a major producer of nutmeg, so much so that their flag even has an image of the nutmeg to show its importance to the economy of that country. Finally, the Dutch lost control of the Banda Islands during World War II. Let me now tell you about the psychoactive and physical effects of nutmeg consumption, at least according to my experience and my research. And I must say, nutmeg is definitely one of my favorite spices. When nutmeg is used in the right way in small doses, I observe that it is a potent antidepressant and creativity enhancer. When used in the wrong way in an extremely big dose, you may become feverishly delirious and psychotic. So what are the negative effects of nutmeg consumption? Well, to understand these negative effects, you first have to consider that nutmeg is a seed. And why is that important? Well, in nature, seeds are designed to survive pest attacks. That's why you will find many seeds in nature have insecticidal and poisonous properties. For example, coffee beans are actually seeds that contain a chemical known as caffeine. Caffeine is a chemical with insecticidal properties, meaning that it prevents insects from consuming the coffee bean or seed by poisoning them. But if a human being consumes caffeine, it doesn't actually poison them in the amount found in nature. Instead, caffeine for us acts as a stimulant. Similarly, nutmeg is a seed that contains insecticidal and poisonous compounds that prevents pests from consuming it. The psychoactive and psychedelic qualities of this nut exist due to those seed-protecting compounds, and it is because of these compounds that both negative and positive effects exist within the nutmeg seed. I will first talk about the negatives. So, when you consume the whole nutmeg nut, it can put a significant toll on the body. You'll feel like your limbs are heavier, your eyes may become bloodshot, and you will experience significant dry mouth and the munchies. You should also know that too much nutmeg consumption taxes your liver, given that the liver is the body's main detoxification center. A study indicated that a high chronic consumption of nutmeg may cause fatty liver, much like the chronic consumption of alcohol does. Also, if the dose of nutmeg is too high, the user may experience anxiety, psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, and a feeling of impending doom. Yeah, that sounds pretty bad, and that's pretty much why people stay away from using nutmeg recreationally. But through my research and experimentation, I have figured out a way to improve the psychoactive experience with nutmeg administration. So in order to reduce the negative effects of the nutmeg nut, I don't directly consume the whole nutmeg. Instead, I grind up no more than 1 teaspoon of the whole nutmeg and make a hot water extract of that said nutmeg. I then drink this tea while it is still hot. The heat ensures that the nutmeg oil doesn't coagulate onto the inner surface of the container or cup and stays in a liquid form to be consumed. The heat also improves the sublingual absorption of the nutmeg essential oil, which has the active compounds. To further reduce the negative effects of nutmeg, while at the same time enhancing the positive effects, I combined nutmeg with a bunch of spices to make a spiced tea. The most important 2 spices are cinnamon and cloves for bringing out a positive psychoactive experience with the nutmeg administration. The spices function to knock out certain enzymes that break down the active compounds of the nutmeg nut. Thus, the addition of certain spices allows a person to consume less nutmeg in order to achieve a significant psychoactive effect, and consuming less nutmeg means the body experiences less of a toll from it. With the addition of spices and prepared as a tea, nutmeg is quite nice. Colors become more vibrant, thoughts flow more freely, and my mood experiences a positive lift. Nutmeg on its own is usually sedating with some stimulation, but adding the spices influences the way that the nutmeg affects the person. In my experience, I found that adding spices enhanced the speedy stimulant quality of nutmeg. I also find that lateral thinking, aka creative thinking, is improved significantly, and I find that imagination is enhanced. Nutmeg reminds me of how I passively paint a picture in my mind while reading a storybook. Actually, I bet nutmeg would enhance the immersion that a reader has while reading a book, meaning that the reader is better able to paint a picture in his mind of what the book is narrating. I find that nutmeg is a potent antidepressant, which in turn makes me very productive. The antidepressant qualities of nutmeg comes from the fact that it contains monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOI for short. MAO inhibitors stop the enzymes that break down neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. That means MAO inhibitors boost the level of these neurotransmitters in the body and in the brain. Generally speaking, increasing brain serotonin levels is thought to improve neurogenesis and positive mood. Increasing brain dopamine levels improves focus, drive, and concentration. And increasing norepinephrine levels is thought to improve the wakefulness and arousal of a person. Note that the most psychoactive component of nutmeg are concentrated in the essential oil. So the essential oil is produced by the steam distillation of ground nutmeg. Nutmeg essential oil is used in perfumery, pharmaceutical industries, and to imbue the flavor of nutmeg in baking. The essential oil of nutmeg has 3 compounds that are responsible for its psychoactive qualities: myristicin, elemicin, and safrole. In fact, a researcher by the name of Alexander Shulgin theorized that the active components inside of nutmeg may metabolize into other psychoactive amphetamines when ingested. For example, he believed myristicin is metabolized to MMDA, elemicin to TMA, and safrole to MDA. Myristicin, aka methoxysafrole, is a benzodioxole with many properties that are possibly therapeutic. They include mild MAO inhibition, which entails dopaminergic, serotonergic, and noradrenergic and antidepressant properties. They also include anticholinergic and enzyme inhibiting properties. In small doses, myristicin shows anti-cancer, chemoprotective, hepatoprotective properties. In huge doses, myristicin, they show cancerous and organ-damaging properties in lab animals. Note that a substance administered to humans may have a different effect when compared to other animals. A good example is with caffeine in coffee and theobromine in chocolate, which are poisonous to insects and dogs respectively, but relatively benign to human beings. In this section, I'll cover the various different properties that made nutmeg attractive as a spice and attractive to traditional physicians for treating their patients. In cooking, many people use nutmegs mainly as a way to spice up a dish with a nice, sweet, sensual, musky, savory, warm flavor. Nutmeg also shows anti-inflammatory effects, pain-killing effects when applied dermally or on the skin, and also protects against thrombosis. Nutmeg is also used by some people as a sedative added to milk or some drink to act as a sleeping aid. The dose of nutmeg would be very small, something like 1/4 of a teaspoon. Nutmeg is also a very potent aphrodisiac, both in my experience and according to scientific studies. Nutmeg may also have an effect on a person's memory. You have to consider that myristicin in nutmeg is a anticholinergic. That means it decreases the level of acetylcholine neurotransmitters in the brain. Honestly speaking, that is usually bad from a nootropic standpoint. That's because our brain needs acetylcholine for encoding, which means learning and acquisition of new memories. Furthermore, there's confounding studies that indicate that nutmeg may actually improve memory. One study on mice showed that the N-hexane extract of nutmeg significantly improved learning, memory, and memory retention of both young and aged rats, while at the same time reversing the scopolamine and diazepam induced impairment to learning and memory. This is because nutmeg also has acetylcholinesterase inhibiting properties. Acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, thereby decreasing its presence in the body and the brain. If this enzyme is decreased, then obviously that would cause an increase of acetylcholine levels. So in the end, nutmeg has a variable effect on memory, either positive and negative, and it may depend on a person's genetics, diet, lifestyle, and other factors that I may not be aware of. In general, I would like to assume that a small quantity of nutmeg in the diet may not impair memory and in some instances may actually have a positive effect on memory. Alternatively, I have an inkling that a larger dose of nutmeg, more than a teaspoon, may start to impair memory. Now I will be talking about the safety of nutmeg. And honestly, I believe that nutmeg is pretty safe for human consumption, although not so for cats and lab animals. That's why you will still find this nice spice in almost every supermarket. Although nutmeg usually becomes harmful if taken for a long period of time at high doses. High chronic intake of nutmeg may cause fatty liver, just like with alcohol. Nutmeg is also dangerous if given to children, and in combination with certain drugs that shouldn't be taken with a MAUI, or has a CNS depressant effect. In fact, there have been only 2 deaths reported that are associated with nutmeg consumption. One child died of nutmeg poisoning, and an adult died due to combining flunitrazepam with nutmeg. For the first case of death, in 1887, an 8-year-old boy ingested 2 nutmegs and became semi-comatose. After he was found, doctors administered an emetic and diffusible stimulants, followed by hypodermic injection of brandy, ammonia, and small doses of sulfate of atropia, but died the following morning. So one may question whether the treatment was more toxic than the ingestion alone. For the second case of death, you should first consider that combining flunitrazepam with alcohol or an opioid is quite deadly. Flunitrazepam is quite dangerous on its own, and perhaps that's why you'll only find this substance in specific regions in only 1 milligram doses, like in Australia. The doses used to be higher, but patients often ended up overdosing. In addition, flunitrazepam is not approved by the FDA in the US. In fact, flunitrazepam is treated as an illegal drug in the US that comes with a long-term prison sentence. In my opinion, flunitrazepam is what I would consider dangerous. Nutmeg not so much, although combining multiple CNS depressants is usually a bad idea. So in the adult case of death, a 55-year-old woman was found dead with a blood myristicin level of 4 micrograms per milliliter and blood flunitrazepam levels of 0.072 or 0.072 micrograms per milliliter. Note that myristicin levels corresponds with the amount of nutmeg consumed, given that myristicin is a major active constituent of nutmeg. Normally, in cases of nutmeg poisoning, life-threatening situations were never observed, and even with high dosages, like 20 to 80 grams of powder. In one example, a myristicin blood level of 2 micrograms per milliliter were measured 8 hours after a person ingested 2 to 3 tablespoons of nutmeg powder, which is approximately 14 to 21 grams of nutmeg. By body weight, it would be 280 to 420 milligrams per kilogram. Note that in the case of the woman's death, she had a blood flunitrazepam level of 0.072 micrograms per milliliter. That translates to 72 micrograms per liter, which is close to the minimum required to see a fatal overdose of flunitrazepam. In other words, this lady already had a toxic level of flunitrazepam in her blood, and it looks like nutmeg, like with alcohol and opioids, pushed the fatal level of flunitrazepam down significantly. Looking back at this study, it may be assumed that this lady took about 5 to 6 tablespoons of nutmeg powder and dangerously 7 or more milligrams amount of flunitrazepam. All in all, nutmeg is pretty safe to use as long as you keep the dosage low to, say, 1 teaspoon. That's what I'm comfortable with. And as long as you don't combine it with other narcotics or CNS depressants or MAOIs. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments below. I'd appreciate if you like and share this video and subscribe to my channel. Bye!